Alright, hello everyone and welcome back to Adventures Elsewhere Reviews, the spoiler-free book review show. So this is an interesting episode because it's actually the third book I've tackled by this author on this channel. This is Anhelos Bound by V.C. Baldick, which is the sequel to Anhelos Lost. This is, like the last book, this is adult source and sorcery. It is 445 pages, according to Goodreads. This one is self-published and I read the ebook. I actually got an ARC of this one, so that's pretty neat. You know the drill by now. At this point in the episode, I do my overall impression in 3 words. This one was actually surprisingly easy, which is nice. This one is gripping, tense, and turbulent. Honestly, this book is one of those where it's like, wow, everything is just falling apart, which is fun. But as always, let's start with the characters. I had a fair amount to say about this lot last time, so I'll probably keep this a bit more brief in this episode. Our main trio is exactly the same. It's Embry, Scion, and Quinn. So I think I opened up my review of the last one by talking about Quinn. I felt in the last book Quinn didn't really have a lot to do. In this book it's a completely other story. Quinn kind of just has punch after punch thrown at him, like he really goes through the ringer on this one. And it's interesting, you see a lot more facets of his character, a lot more things sort of start to bleed together as things start to come unraveled for Quinn, and it's really interesting to see how he handles that. He has a very strong arc through this book. He was such an interesting character last time, it's nice to see him actually be given that chance to really show that and really sort of flourish in that proper main character role. Embry has a lot of things going on, even at the point where there isn't technically much she can do, there's still a lot going on. She's a really interesting character, and honestly quite a lot of the book somewhat centres around her. I think she plays a bigger overall role in this book than she did in Lost, and it's interesting to see how she handles that. Now, all of this that's said about the main trio, Scion is sadly where it starts to slip a little bit. Scion's journey, I thought, was probably the most compelling part of the last book. His sort of slide into addiction with the stamina potions and all that, I absolutely loved. And we get that here, but it's much more static. Scion does have a lot of things to take care of and a lot of internal conflict. Probably even more internal conflict than the last book, which is saying something. This kid is a mess. He definitely gets the least on the agenda, and there are points where you feel it a little bit, but Scion's chapters can be quite a nice respite, so I think really this is a bit of a taste thing. You know, all this said, it's not that Scion's chapters aren't compelling, they very much are. There's just the odd one where I don't feel it in quite the same way. The supporting cast is a little bit different in this one. There are some familiar names, so you get Lena and you get Val, both from the last book. Lena... poor Lena, man. She, again, sort of goes through this a bit. She plays, I would say, a much more active role than she did last time, and it's fun to see how she operates. Like, the sort of dichotomy between her and Embry, like, the contrast there was a big part of the Anhelos Lost. And that's still there, but you also get a big contrast between her and Quinn. And that was there in Lost, but it's much more prominent here. And it's a very different contrast. She's just kind of an outlier of a character, but also slots in really well. It's interesting. And again, in Lost, Lena was shown to be brave. That was one of the things that was sort of meant to be the subversion with her, but she really comes into her own in this book. She's very, very brave, and what she does with that, because she's brave but not to a fault, and she's also not stupid with it, which is quite rare, I think, to see with characters like that, so that was quite nice, quite refreshing, actually. So Justina was a character who came up a fair bit in Lost, but I don't believe I mentioned her on the episode. So Justina is a noblewoman. She's effectively a noblewoman's daughter, which in my mind classes her as a noblewoman. She's one of Quinn's close friends, and sort of has her eye on him a bit. You know, there's a literal proximity gap between them in this book. So Justina ends up spending a lot more time with Sion, and they're implied to have a sort of cordial relationship by way of, oh, you're my brother's friend, so I know you, I sort of get along with you a bit, but they grow in closeness quite a lot. It's not how I expected it to go, and it's quite a sort of nice take on almost the sort of, not the next generation exactly, but the slightly younger people in this time of turmoil, and how they handle it, how well or not, how they try and navigate through it when there are influences pulling them this way and that, and they don't necessarily find either or any of them all that credible, but they're not really, but they know that they don't know everything. So how they come to their own conclusions, and Justina and Sion's push and pull on that is very compelling. I like that a lot. Raven, I'm not sure whether I mentioned in the last episode or not, but he's a very interesting character. He's Quinn's messenger, I guess. He's quite a hard role to define. He's a very, very old man, which makes him compelling. There's a lot of mystique and mysteriousness around him. You start to learn a bit more about him in this book, and exactly the sorts of things he can do and what different people do and don't know about him. It's a super compelling part of the story. There's not that much of it. It doesn't get that much page time overall, but it very much stuck in my mind. It's one of those moments where you can tell that the author had some fun with this. And Raven actually also plays a really important role this time as well. Raven in the last book was sort of there in the odd scene, making his presence known, but this time has a much more pivotal role. So that's always fun when you get a really good character sort of growing in importance. That's great. Talking of, Gallus is very much in the same camp. Gallus is senior military, and it was obvious in the last book he was going to become more important. He had some dealings with the Queen of Arctus, whose name escapes me in the current moment. And it was very clear that this was going to come to light and be more important. And the sorts of strings that he tries to pull, I mean, if he's not in your, like, top 3 most hated characters in this book, then yeah. But top 1 on that spot absolutely goes to Aragorn. This man lives up to the hype he got in Lost. In Lost, we were told that this man was horrendous, but we didn't actually see, I don't think he actually graced the page in Lost. I think we first see him here. He's one of those villains that you absolutely just love to hate, and it's good to have that. I like a sympathetic villain as much as the next guy, but having someone who is you just get unadulterated disgust and hatred for them, that's pretty sweet too. I do like that, and it works really well in a story like this. Now, Val. If you watched the last episode, I talked quite a lot about Val, and I had my little theories about him and this and that and whatever, and I really liked him as a character. He actually plays, I would say, a bigger role in the story. This time he has a very interesting arc in this story, a very compelling arc. And now we're going to talk about pacing, because this was probably the single biggest issue I had with the first book. This time round, though, no issues with pacing whatsoever. It's really good. Pacing's great. I couldn't complain about it if I wanted to. Props to the author on that one. You know, I'll admit at this point in this episode that I wasn't convinced that I was going to keep going with this series after reading the first one, but as soon as this one hooked me, which was early, I was like, okay, I'm actually really glad I continued with it. As for writing quality, again, I think this is an improvement on the last book, but I still feel like there's a bit of over-explaining going on, especially around Gallus and Gallus's POV, when that comes up sort of sporadically. Again, I wonder if this is a genre thing, if this is a taste thing, but there were a couple of points where it got under my skin a little bit. Otherwise, it's pretty good. The world building and lore, much like the last book, it's really tight, it's really detailed, and despite lots of expansion on that, you don't lose that feeling. So that's really nice, because it's really easy to fall into that trap sometimes. with books where, you know, you get really tight world building in the first book, and as it goes, it gets a bit looser and a bit looser, and you lose the vibe, and that's a real shame. Doesn't happen here, and there's sort of no good solutions, everything's a bit of a mess, and the realism of that is all still there. If anything, that ramps up, actually, which I really love that, especially in a story that has as much politicking and whatnot going on as this. I actually think that's really important to have. The expansion, world building wise, into Twilight, the Twylian people, and actual bits of the Twylian lands as well, that's all really cool. I really like that. That's really nicely done, and again, all the contrast and everything is really cool. I touched on the themes already. This, again, is much the same as Lost. It's a lot of burden of royalty with someone like Quinn, and some other characters now too, so Sion's starting to feel it, being the other heir. But that gets a lot more weighty and a lot more complicated as well, actually. So that's fun. Tons and tons and tons of politicking, so much politics in this book. Love that. And again, the whole idea of opportunity cost and not being able to do the right thing is really good. And loyalty and betrayal is much bigger in this book as well. It came up a bit last time round, but it's a very big deal in this book. The vibe and tone is slightly different on this one. I wonder how much of this is by virtue of much better pacing and maybe being a bit more immersed because of that. But you get this very much this modern classic feel. It's a very modern book, as was the last one, but it has a lot of classic fantasy feel, some classic elements, especially with this absolutely abhorrent antagonist. There are not words enough in the English language to describe how much I hate Aragorn. I'm serious, I absolutely despise that man. Things like that, and the sort of flawed hero and the burden of royalty, all of these things. You get all of this classic feel, but you get the modern elements coming in as well. But on top of that, you also get something that you didn't really get in the last book. The last book had a few action scenes in it. This one has a lot more. It's to the point where I could probably stick a note on this saying, this is an action-packed book, actually. And the action's written really well. It's very clear as well, which is something that can often happen with action, is it's like, this is great, but I'm not sure I'm seeing this right, or I'm not sure exactly where. Wait, how did someone get over that? I thought they were over there. There's nothing, none of that here. It's really well done action, which is really difficult to do. One of the things I said in the Anhelos Lost episode was, I'm not quite sure what sword and sorcery is. Having read this book, I feel like I understand exactly what sword and sorcery is meant to be. This feels almost a bit like, this is the quintessential sword and sorcery book. I might be talking out of my arse. There's a pretty high chance of that at any given moment, to be honest. But that was my 2 cents on it. And in terms of continuing the series, I touched on this a little bit earlier, brings the plot along really nicely in the continuation, the whole feel of everything's falling apart. And when I say everything's falling apart, I mean everything. The one question mark I do have is in the prologue and in the epilogue of both books, it centres around the being. There's a lot of mystique around the being and exactly what it's doing and what its purpose is. For what it's worth, the prologue of this book is absolutely excellent, and I'm very intrigued about what the being is going to do from that prologue alone, never mind anything else. By the epilogue, the being's overall role starts to become a lot more clear, and you start to get a lot more of an indication of what's going on. But it's sort of odd, because the being is shown incredibly early in both books to have massive amounts of power and influence, but you don't feel it. On a reread, granted, that might hit differently, but I have mixed feelings about that, because it strikes me as a slightly odd point in the series, and I don't know if I love it. I did ask on social media, because VC Baltic did sort of ask me anything about the series. What I asked was, how many books is this series going to be? And the answer was 5 to 6. In which case, I think it can actually work. I think that's probably the minimum of where a plot point like this works. And given the improvement and how good Ungovernables is, absolutely stellar, I have faith that Baldock can pull this off, but I don't know that I love it. And talking of things that I don't love, we gotta talk about the ending of this book. I have a lot of very, very mixed feelings on this one. It's gonna be very hard to do this without spoilers, but I'm going to. I completely understand what the writer was going for, I just wasn't sold on it. It goes by very quickly, and I don't think that helps. But this book is 450 pages. It's really difficult to say that in a book that's 450 pages. I go, actually, I want a few more here. I'd shoot myself in the face for that if I was the writer here. I completely get what the intention was here, and I completely get how it's meant to work story-wise, especially if there is an element of mind control going on, which is possible, or something like that. I wouldn't rule that out. I don't know. It's not that clear by design, but that's entirely possible, which would make it make a lot more sense. But it didn't quite land for me, it just didn't. I think the main issue I have with this is we are told that a character is having this particular difficulty, but that's kind of the issue, is we're told this, but we're not really shown it. And and we're also told that mostly from a very particular POV that has proven to not be the most reliable or just the most correct, to be honest, about certain things and certain people. So the moment just doesn't quite feel earned to me, and I might just be being really harsh. All this said, there are a lot of absolutely excellent moments in this book. Some of my favourite moments, I've talked about this already, the prologue and the epilogue in this book are absolutely great. They're really, really good. All the sort of political head-to-head moments, there are a lot of those in this book, and I think every POV character gets one of these. And they come around between a lot of different characters as well. It's not just Quinn gets his head-to-head with this person, Embry gets it with that person, and Quinn gets a lot of these. That's always really fun. There's also an action sequence in Mountains. You know how I feel about Mountains. If you've been around my writing, my channel, my art at all, you know I love my Mountains. Action sequences are cool. Action sequences and Mountains, sign me up. Really like that. That was just one of those really well written, really evocative sequences, and brought characters together and concluded arcs nicely. Really, really nicely done scene. Really like that one. And there's a really cool sequence involving a church as well. Some sort of familiar tropes in there, but it's nicely handled, some fresh takes on it, so that's always fun. Like, all of these you could tout as sort of art-inspiring moments as well, especially the mountain action sequence is so visual. But there are a few that really grab my attention on that. So there's a sequence in the Feywoods, and there's a lake in the Feywoods, and that really struck me as sort of being this, yes, it's beautiful, but it's also kind of horrifying, and it's a very moment-to-moment feeling with that. You could do something really interesting with that visually, where it's how much attention you're paying to the image. Like, it looks nice and then it doesn't, but then you pay more attention, it starts to look nice again. Almost, you could do something very interesting with that. These sequences where there are captives as well, because some characters are taken captive. The wedding sequence as well. Any sort of big gathering or anything like that always sort of brings out the, oh yes, let's paint the ballroom kind of vibe, but the wedding in particular, I think you could have like a really cool, almost like panorama, that's not the word I'm looking for, but like a wide shot of the entire wedding and all of the various bits and pieces that are sort of falling apart and being duct taped together, sort of plot and character-wise. You could have a lot of fun with that. In much the same way as the Feywoods idea, where you look at it and it's like, oh, this is nice, wait, hang on a minute. So this is a tricky book to rate, Much like the last one, it's quite difficult to rate, but for entirely different reasons, actually. Because the last book I struggled with, I like the characters and I like the themes and I like the politics and all of these things, but things like the pacing really threw me off in that. And there was a real question mark over whether I wanted to continue with the series as well. And when, that's the primary purpose of a first book, then you have to take that into account. This time, the difficulty comes in the pacing is great, and it's a well written book, and the characters are great, with a couple of asterisks on that. World building's really good, the themes are really good, and there are tons and tons of things that I like. Like, if you want to talk about proportion of the book in terms of pages that I feel positively about versus negatively about, positive way outstrips, not even close. Like, it will probably be like 90-10 or something like that. The problem is that 10% I have, it's quite pertinent what I don't like. Some things feel like a bit of a missed opportunity, some things really don't feel justified. And when you have question marks that are quite big, and the ending overall just doesn't land. Like, the big one for me is the ending. Like, I say it's difficult to rate, but at the end of the day, here's the thing. It's a better book than Lost. I enjoyed it a lot more than I enjoyed Lost. I enjoyed this book a lot. And I very much want to keep reading the series. So, job done on that one. Would I rate this book 5 stars if the ending had landed? Probably. I would probably set some things aside and say, okay, I don't love that, but the ending was really good. But at the end of the day, the ending is what knocks this one down to a 4. But again, maybe this book is still just too fantasy for me as well. I'm not a fantasy reader, I'm certainly not a fantasy lover, so at the end of the day, maybe this is much more of a me thing than a book thing, and it's just about taste, and I'm just wrong about it. So at the end of the day, I would absolutely recommend this book, and I would absolutely recommend this series. If you like fantasy, you'll like this. It's that simple. If you are a writer and you would like to send me an ARC, there is a cheat sheet at the end of the video, which will give you a pretty good idea of what I'll take and all of those sorts of things. However, it's not comprehensive, so there is a full time-stamped video that will take you through everything that you need to know around that. That, I believe, is also in the description, so you can find that really easily. It's time-stamped, so you can skip sections that don't apply to you, get to exactly what you want very easily. That is about all I have for now. So until next time, have a wonderful rest of your day, and happy reading.